We need to get Randy's mic turned up. I forget and it's, if you're interested in Wayne's tabbing class, tabbing for harmonica, that's over here. Hey Cedric, could we get that mic up?
Test, 1, 2.
There you go. So, and Randy's with the Lone Wolf Blues Company. He's famous for absolutely outstanding pedals for harmonica, delays, and other effects, and the Harp attack, and a bunch of stuff, and he'll tell you about that. But there's no particularly good order to take the subject of amps and mics and tone, so we're just arbitrarily going to start with amps. And there's a lot to cover. We'll do our best to make it fun and exciting, but maybe the way to start. Does that ever happen, anybody? The arch enemy of the harmonica player is feedback. Okay? And there's a lot of reasons you get feedback. Feedback is quite simply the sound coming from the speakers is reaching the microphone. And so it's getting amplified, and it creates a vicious cycle. Amplifiers are set up for guitar players. They're not set up for you unless you buy a harp amp set up specifically for harp players. If you buy a guitar amp, it's set up so that the guitar player can turn around and get Hendrix-like feedback. But a guitar string and a guitar pickup don't couple to sound waves nearly as efficiently as a microphone, whose job it is to couple to sound waves. And a guitar pickup's output is like half of what a microphone's output is. So if you plug into a guitar amp and you turn on your mic and you try and get the volume very hard, it's gonna go like that. And it's gonna come on in a hurry, and it's gonna be nasty. It's just terrible. So one of the first things you need to know is you can make most harmonica amps, particularly tube amps, much more friendly by reducing their gain. And the reason I say most harmonica or most amps is that a lot of amps share a very similar circuit for their preamp. They have a few preamp tubes. And you've probably heard the word 12AX7. Well, the 12AX7 is a tube in a series of tubes that have different gain factors. And the gain factor of a 12AX7 is 100. But there's other ones, the 12AX and the 12AY and the 12AT. Down at the bottom of the list is a 12AU, which has a gain factor of 17. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch the amp off for a second. And Randy's going to, this is Deke's amp, but I reset it and I put 3 12AX7s in it. That's the way it comes. That's the way a Fender Bassman or almost any new guitar amp comes from the store. Fender Blues Junior, same thing. So we're going to take these tubes out, 2 of them, and we're going to put 12AUs in there. And we'll see what difference it makes. I've used this analogy, a lot of you probably heard it. But if you can imagine having to drive a 500 horsepower Corvette, where the throttle pedal only moves this far. Full throttle is full throttle. Idle is idle. But managing your throttle in a corner is tough, right? What we're doing by reducing the gain is giving us this much throttle pedal travel. Full is still full. This isn't going to give you any more power. And it might give you a tiny bit more volume. I'll explain why in a moment. And off is still off. But what it does is it gives you controllability in the middle. Okay? It just makes it more harp friendly and easier to modulate. Pardon me for a second. Can I borrow some saliva? What's that? We're substituting, in this case, I'm taking out what are the tubes that are called V2 and V3. I have a document you can download from my website that explains this, and we're putting 12AUs in instead of 12AXs. So I haven't changed the volume settings, but now I've turned my mic all the way up. Okay, plenty of volume, we might want more. I can still get it to feedback, but if you'll notice, You hear it? It just kind of sneaks in. It comes on. As I turn the volume up, it doesn't leap out of the amp. I can hear it coming. You know? You hear how slow that came on? Anybody can react to that with a volume control. That's why you should have a volume control on your microphone, by the way. Doesn't change your tone that much, but it makes the amp really manageable. Now, you notice that I've actually got it up into the feedback zone, which means I'm getting more power out to you, and all I got, because it reacts slowly, I can predict that. I can turn the mic up and knock the volume down. So I can actually get a little louder by reducing the gain of the amp. That's counterintuitive, but that's the way it is. That is one of the best kept secrets and one of the most useful things you can know. Now the next thing you need to know is you can't bring a BB gun to a knife fight. Stage volumes vary a huge amount. If you're doing a one-man band, an acoustic duo, a trio, or you're at a jam with 2 guitar players with their Marshall stacks, the sound level on stage, forget about the audience, we might have a sound guy to help us with that, might not, but you need to hear yourself play. And if you're playing with that big jam band, 15 watts isn't going to cut it. So now is a perfectly good time for me to turn it over to Randy, who's going to talk about what makes tone and the relationship between power of an amp and perceived sound level. And it's important to know, because it turns out to get just a little louder, it takes a lot more power.
Yeah. Our amps are all rated in wattage, all right? And that's actually correlates to how much wattage the power tube is consuming. It really has little to do directly with your audio level. Audio level is measured in sound pressure, in dBs. And to get noticeably louder, not hugely louder, just noticeably, is a 3 dB increase. Okay, so that everybody can hear that difference. In order to get 3 dB increase, you have to actually double your power. So, a 12 watt amp versus an 8 watt amp, really there's little to no difference. You're gonna have to double just to get a little bit louder. To actually double your loudness, you gotta go 10 dB hotter. So that's about 10 times your wattage. So you got to go from a 5 watt amp to a 50 watt amp to really get twice the sound level. A lot of people try to squeeze a little bit of power out, or might purchase one amp over another one because it's 18 and this one's 15. You shouldn't even, there's no need to even consider that. You want to focus on the tone, because then a few watts ain't going to make you no difference. One thing that does help if you want to be a little louder out of your amp is the speaker area. The size of your speakers. Going from an 8 to a 12 can give you a good 3 dB increase. Maybe even a little more. Going from a 10 to 2 10s. You know, you can increase your sound that way. You can actually be louder. You're going to move more air. You got more speaker area, going back and forth, moving more air, increasing sound pressure, increasing your dBs.
Ooh, hand way up. Randy and I were talking about this. Nobody really has a good intuitive feel for what a dB is. But there's these things called sound pressure meters, and they used to be expensive. There's an app for that. If you have an iPhone, I don't know if it exists for Android, but it probably really does. It's called SPL, Sound Pressure Level Meter. Okay, SPL. And it works, and it's pretty accurate. So I've actually used this to measure sound levels in various environments. And, you know, like right now, it's coming in at about 90 dBs while I'm talking. Okay? And if Adam were to get up here and do his one-man band, it might come up to 95. I've been on stage at jam situations where it goes up to 105. That's 10 dBs. That's the difference between hearing a 5-watt amp, which sounds loud as hell in your living room, and needing a 50-watt amp on stage to hear yourself. If your amp is underpowered, you're going to keep trying to turn it up so you can hear yourself, and then it's going to feed back. So another part of this whole feedback equation is having enough power that you don't have to get it all the way up to the point where it's feeding back. Okay?
One other thing in speaker choice that you can consider, or should consider, if you want a little more loudness, is the sensitivity of speakers. Speakers all have a sensitivity rating, and it's due to the size of the voice coil. The bigger the voice coil, the lower the sensitivity. The lower the sensitivity, the louder that speaker is going to be. So you can get a good speaker. You can pay a little more for it, but it might be 6 dB louder than the speaker you have now. So these things should be considered. I actually feel like the speaker doesn't get enough attention in everybody. Your amplifier, a good Harp amp, is going to be based on 3 design features, 3 key components to consider. One is your coupling capacitor. The coupling capacitor is what is going to give you a fat tone. The basements, they've always been so great for Harp because they were designed with 0.1 microfarad coupling capacitors. That's really what you want to look for in an amp. If you want to get an amp modded, that's really the one thing you want to have done to it, is the coupling capacitors. Yes?
You're talking about that value throughout the chain, right? That's not just the amplifier.
Throughout what?
The chain.
Yes. There's going to be several of them in an amplifier.
Randy, can you explain real briefly what is the coupling capacitor for?
Okay.
And why is this important?
It's a coupling capacitor is what brings your audio from one stage of the preamp to the next stage. It allows it to pass through. Each tube has a plate voltage that might be anywhere from 100 to 250 volts. And we need to block that and but still allow audio to get to the next stage. And that's what your coupling capacitor does. There is a resistor that forms a high-pass filter in conjunction with every coupling capacitor. And this filtering is in place, and these capacitor value is chosen for guitar players. And the reason being, because guitar pickups have greater sensitivity on the low end frequencies than on the high end. So they kind of filter a little bit of the low end off to even out the frequency spectrum. Okay, good for them, bad for us. Once you take care of that, then the next best thing for everyone to do is look at the preamp gain. That's the second important thing. You got the coupling capacitors, the preamp gain, and your speaker. It's as simple as that to get a great sounding Harp amp. And the preamp gain, that's has to do with what we did here. Whereas in a design, I may use some other methods to achieve that lower gain. For the average person, a tube swap is extremely effective, affordable. Everyone should try it if they having feedback issues. And for all the reasons that Greg mentioned, when you get that feedback, up around 7 or 8 on the volume control, it's much easier to deal with. Use proper etiquette with your microphone to control the feedback. Then I already talked a lot about the speaker. One other thing about the speaker that everybody has questions about is Alnico versus ceramic. There is a difference. The Alnico magnet breaks down a little differently than the ceramic magnet when it reaches the peak and the peaks of your signal. Greg, would you want to elaborate that a little bit more?
I'm certainly not an expert in it, but Ted Weber is one of the great speaker gurus, and he has a great series of articles. And I learned this from one of those articles. If you want to go to the source, read it yourself. But basically, in the presence of an electromagnetic field, which is what we have with a speaker, we put a current through the coil, and that generates an electromagnetic field, which goes back and forth and causes the speaker cone to move relative to this big fixed magnet. Well, it turns out that in the presence of an electromagnetic field, the Alnico magnet begins to break down, its magnetic field begins to lose polarization in a strong electromagnetic field. And the effect of this for a player is that as the volume comes up and you start hitting peaks, it begins to add a natural compression and breakup. It actually will lower the volume of the very loudest bits. Whereas a more modern ceramic magnet doesn't do that. Its field remains strong all the time. So the ceramic magnet might ultimately go louder. That might not be what you want.
And it might not be the breakup. You may, that little subtle difference, a lot of time is what we want in our amp, in a little different breakup.
So how can you tell the difference if you look at it?
The Alnicos, think about the vintage speakers. They're magnets about that big around, maybe that long. They're different, different sizes. Some are about that big around. But the ceramic magnets are the big ones. They're about that big around and only about that thick. They are characteristically, you'll see aluminum or a cap on the back, or it might be something else, but you'll see the round magnet around the edges of it. So it's the shape. They're more pancaked, whereas the Alnico is longer. And
The body around the tone windings is long.
It's on the back of the speaker.
The
You
reason-
can't see the windings at all.
the
but
reason-
yeah, one is this big around on the back
See,
if the speaker's that big, and one's that
the
big.
ceramics are a lot bigger, and the reason they're bigger is because they're not as effective as the Alnico. That's why you see a much bigger ceramic speaker on a magnet on the back of a speaker than an Alnico. One thing that we really can do with our amps, when we focusing on the speakers, way overlooked. I mean, because you get some great sound out of a good speaker, is a vintage speakers off of eBay. Because we play harmonica, we don't have to have a guitar speaker. Guitar speaker, if you put any kind of speaker in a guitar amp, a guitar will most likely blow it out because of transient frequencies. We don't have that problem. So that means we can try all kind of different speakers. And you don't have to get a high sought after vintage speaker off of eBay, particular Jensen or anything else. You can try any old speaker that might have come out of an old TV set, and you might get great vintage tone with it. So, we want to go, any questions?
So you're using a harmonica mic there, it's a big kind of ball type mic, and it has a pretty high output, right?
Yes.
But microphones have different, is it milliamps, is that the output?
You're jumping ahead of the course lot. We're going to talk about mics. And as soon as when you're done with what you're going to say about amps,
Yeah,
we can jump in.
I think now's a good time to go with mics because
Okay.
we talked about the amplifier and the speaker. If any more questions on speakers or mics?
Okay.
Honestly, I was going to say, suppose you use a mic that has less output than the mic there. Is there anything that you can do to the amp in the way of tube slots, like Bluetooth up, add
With lower a lower output mic, you can get away with more gain. But it's important not to confuse gain with volume. Okay? Volume is the level that the speakers are running at based on how much input there is. But gain is technically it's the slope of that curve. From input level here to input level here, what's the output? And again, I come back to the accelerator pedal analogy. The best thing to do with that is just turn the amp up louder. Because in either case, with just about any amp, even set up for low gain, you can turn the amp up to the point where it's going to feed back. Well, you just can't play louder than that. What you want is manageable feedback.
When you turn the amp, if I do that, when I turn the amp up, am I turning up both the preamp stage and the power amp stage, or am I just turning up the power amp stage?
You want to take it?
When you turn up your volume control, all you're doing is you're increasing the preamp level, signal level. And that's it. So you're able to hit the power section with a higher level to achieve the same output level in the end, which is, I mean, the power tube is designed to take a certain level of signal to produce a certain power on the outage.
What if you got an amp that has a preamp gain and a master saw?
I was just going to ask him that. Yeah, some amps have a volume control and a master control. What's that about?
The volume control or drive control, it can go by either name, is going to be in between preamp stages. And your master control is going to be in between the last preamp stage and your power section. This is mainly for guitar players so that they can increase the drive in their preamp and get a different type of distortion. Get a preamp tube distortion versus a power tube distortion. Now, what's the difference? There's a big difference. In triode, your preamp tubes are triode tubes. Your power tubes are like Pentos, 6V6, 6L6s. And they create very different sounds and tones in their distortion. A little bit of preamp overdrive is good. It gives you a little fatness, it gives a little richness. A lot of preamp overdrive is muddy sounding. It doesn't sound good. Not only do you have increase in feedback potential, you're going to muddy your tone. We want to keep that to a minimum in a good harp amp. And we want to
partly because we can overdrive it when we want. When we want to make the amp dirtier, one of the beauties of playing harmonica with a good microphone is the ability to overdrive. And I'll talk about this in a moment. Overdrive the preamp and get that mud, which you heard when I did this. But all I have to do is back off a little, play single notes instead of chords, open my cup, and I'm back down to a more moderate drive level and get a cleaner sound.
Where we want our overdrive is in the power stage. We want power tube compression. That's where the crunch, the good vintage tone comes from that we want. So we are looking for overdrive. You know, we are looking to push that tube hard, but we want that push to be in the power section as opposed to the preamp section.
So does that mean your volume is lower on the volume control and higher on the master volume? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.